Hello, book crew, and welcome to this uh, basic sort of guide to The Professionals, which is a TV show that was broadcast in Britain between 1977 and 1983. Though they actually stopped, they actually stopped making episodes after 1981, but they continued to broadcast until 1983 for various reasons that went on behind the scenes. Industrial disputes and other things, which I won't be going into because I'm pretty much going to be talking about sort of the on-screen issues. So there will be references to one or two things. Now, obviously, this is the title card of The Professionals. Sorry about that. And so, as I say, it was a program late 70s, early 80s, action adventure, and it follows the. Second. So I should just explain why it is I'm doing this guide. And it's because it's a part of Garbaugust, which is an event created by Criminally, celebrate all things trash in sort of fiction. One of the categories is novelisations, and I bought actually last year for my birthday a set of novelisations of The Professionals. So there we go. So that's actually, I'll just move this down here and just go back to here. So that one, which I am presently reading, Where the Jungle Ends, Stakeout, No Stone, and Cry Wolf. And these are novelisations of, in many cases, multiple episodes of The Professionals. And so if you just bear with me a second, I'll just get the exact ones for these. So Where the Jungle Ends is a novelisation of Series 1 episodes, Old Dog New Tricks, Long Shot, Where the Where the Jungle Ends, which is the title, and The Long Arm of, and the Killer with a Long Arm. Sorry about that, my cat decided to knock. He decided to knock the books off the corner of the table. So just bear with me a second whilst I pick them up. So the next one, which is Stated, is a novelisation of Series 1 episodes, Stakeout, When the Heat Cools Off, and Close Quarters. Interestingly about that one, about Where the Jungle Ends, it obviously it's a novel that includes a long shot. But interestingly, the second book in the novelisation series, which is called Professionals 2, The Long Shot, is named after that episode, but for some reason isn't novelised in it. And then number 9, which is No Stone Unturned. No Stone, sorry. That is a novelisation of Series 5 episodes Call, Mangle, Quinn, and No Stone, which sort of makes sense. And then finally, this one, Cry Wolf, is a novelisation of Lawson's Last Stand and Cry Wolf. Now, these were the name on them is of the author. I'll just hold them up. Is Ken Blake, which is a house name. It was. A second. It was in fact two authors. So the first one we have here is. I'll just press. Let me get his name up. It is. Sorry about this. It's Kenneth Bulmer, who is a sort of long, very well known, sort of long, very prolific British science fiction author. Well, author of everything, but mostly known for science fiction. Noticeably, he's Dre Prescott science fiction series, of which this is the first book, which was in 1971, called Transit Scorpio. And the other author, I should say, Bulmer, wrote. Let's see. So 11 of the 14 books, 11 of the 15 books that were published. And the other 4 were written by this gentleman, Robert Holdstock, who's probably most famous for writing a fantasy series called, the first book of which is called Mythago Wood. Well, I've not read either of Holdstock or Bulmer's works before, so it's going to be interesting reading the two and also seeing what sort of differences between the the styles they write in, because Bourne was a man was born in 1921, died in 2005, and then Robert Holstock was born in 1948, died in 2009. So men of a different generation, and I believe, going from what I've read about them, very different sort of styles. So as I go on, I should be interested to look at that. And I will be doing individual reviews of these books. Now, in the series, the three main characters are, in the centre, you have George Cowley, played by the late great Gordon Jackson, who is probably most famous to most people internationally for playing the butler in Upstairs Downstairs, which I believe he was playing, he may have just finished playing when the profession started. On his, to my left, you have Doyle, played by Martin Shaw, who's famous now for playing Judge John Deed, and also George Dempney. In this, he plays Doyle, who's an ex-policeman, former policeman, recruited to CI5, and due to his hairstyle, he was nicknamed in the series as the Bionic Golly. And then on my right is Bodie, played by Lewis Collins. Lewis Collins, a man who, if there was ever an actor born to play a role, was born to play James Bond, and sadly didn't do it. Bodie is a former mercenary in Africa and member of the British Army, served in British regiments and then SAS before being recruited into CI5. CI5 is when the series begins, a newly established intelligence service. It's called Criminal Intelligence 5, and it's about going after criminals in Britain, sort of going after them in a way that is not typical of the British services, and it's established to sort of get around the sort of bureaucratic differences between different services, so between the army, the police, the intelligence services, and then sort of the rivalry between the intelligence services. So that's sort of, in the series, they are very much go after criminals, terrorists, mercenaries, and they go up against the KGB a couple of times as well, because this is very much this is set contemporaneously in the late 70s, early 80s, and it's very much of sort of reacting to sort of the issues of the day to a degree, but in a very sort of pulpy, action-oriented way, and really entertaining. The series, there's one particular episode which deals with race relations called Klansman. I think it's called The Klansman. Let me just double check. Which was, I don't believe, ever broadcast in Britain. Let me just find the episode. It's from the first. Yes, it's called Klansman, which, as I say, was never broadcast in Britain. Due to sort of nature of sort of race relations, and it's particularly Bodie, who is portrayed as having a sort of being sort of unpleasant to people, black people, which Lewis Collins himself was not pleased by. He said that he felt that out of character for Bodie, and I think he's quite right. Though I've got to say, I have subsequently watched the episode of The Klansman, and it's actually quite entertaining. A bit strange, but yeah, right. I can understand why you wouldn't publish it, why it wouldn't broadcast today on British TV, because I don't think it has ever been broadcast on British TV. But in the late 70s, I don't see why it would have any great issue in terms of what goes on in that series. I should say the series was criticised quite strongly by people because of its use of violence and the sort of sex. Because Bodie and Doyle are very much lads out back town. They enjoy women, and that's portrayed as a good thing. And that's what got criticised by both sort of both left-wing critics of the show, so feminists and sort of socialists, but also people like Mary Whitehouse, who really didn't like the portrayal of sex or violence on TV. Even though arguably the show is quite right-wing in a way. So, now, just to give a bit of details about the creation of the show, in the late 70s, so in the mid-70s, the ITV had British TV at the time for what was the independent TV, so the ones of the Independent Television Authority, which is set up in 1955, had sort of regional broadcasters, so that in the north of England you had Granada, you had Thames Television, London Weekend Television, Professional Creative Art was under the London Television, London Weekend Television, done through their Use and Films branch. And they had from sort of from 69 up until just before I think up until 76, they'd had two very well regarded shows on. One had been called Special Branch, which is about Special Branch. For those that don't know, Special Branch it's now part of the sort of counter-terrorism command, but at the time it was the police force that dealt with espionage and terrorism, particularly Irish Republican terrorism. So in Britain, MI5, which is the Domestic Intelligence Service, doesn't have powers of arrest. So during the Cold War, if MI5 wanted somebody arrested, and they had the evidence saying you actually committed a crime, they'd hand it over to Special Branch, and the Special Branch would arrest them. So the TV show Special Branch, which I think went from 1969 to 1972, was very much a show about Special Branch. The first two seasons follow Darren Nesbitt, who's probably most famous for playing the villainous Major von Hoffen, the SS character, Gestapo character in Who Dares Wins. Very good film, by the way. Sorry, Where Eagles Dare. Sorry, Who Dares Wins is the film Lewis Collins was in the back of the and that follows him in various cases. Then they did that was in black and white in the initial colour, and then they did the last two series were done by Houston Films, and they were filmed on film, and they were very action-packed, very action-orientated, a lot more sort of brutal in the style. Not that the first two seasons of Special Branch hadn't been. They did have, and they were dealing with real-world issues, but they were mostly studio bound, and so you didn't have the element of realism. Whereas with the final two series, as I say, made by Houston Films, they were a lot more action-packed, filmed out on location, and obviously on film itself, which made a real difference. If you ever watched sort of Doctor Who from the series from the 60s and 70s, you notice when they go from studio scenes filmed on videotape to when they do outside stuff recorded on film. I find that it's noticeable in black and white, but particularly noticeable in colour, particularly in the poetry era, where it's like night and day in terms of the quality of the picture on screen. And so Special Branch had done well. And then the Sweeney came on the scene, and Sweeney was sort of the successor to Special Branch, which is about where Special Branch was about Special Branch. The Sweeney was about Sweeney, which is a nickname for the flying squad of the Metropolitan Police, who deal with sort of bank robbers and armed criminals and the like. The problem which was serious that is still to this day loved by British people, and rightly so, because it's a really great crime drama. Crime action drama, and it had John Thor playing Jack Regan, and his right hand man Bill Carter, played by David Woodman, who in the case of Sweeney did not write nor sing the theme tune to the Sweeney, unlike Minder, which he made a few years later. And so Sweeney goes on for a few years, is really well regarded, has two feature films made in the 70s, both of which are good, which I can recommend. You can buy them quite cheaply on eBay. In fact, I have a DVD set, which got both of them, which I bought for I think £3 about a couple of months ago. So well worth a watch, especially Sweeney 2, which is really interesting. Sweeney 1 is the Sweeney. It's called the Sweeney with a question mark, with an exclamation mark. Is interesting. It's a political thriller inspired by the Profumo affair, and then Sweeney with an exclamation mark 2, which is the second film, is very much more as a crime investigation about bank robbers who are coming into the country from Malta, committing robberies and then going back to Malta, which with sort of smaller sort of stories sort of interwoven in it. Really entertaining to watch. And then the Sweeney went off in, I believe, 70, was going off in 77 or 78, I can't quite remember. And ITV, which was sort of the overriding sort of broadcaster, sort of the framework in which all these sort of regional shows were broadcasting these programs, wanted something to replace it. And this is where the Professionals come in. Now, the Professionals was created by this gentleman called Brian Clements. He was one of the most prolific writers in British TV and film from the 1960s to the 1980s. He wrote for almost everything. In fact, the only thing he didn't write for or create was Doctor Who, and that's simply because he didn't have time. and it's probably his most famous creation in this period was the Avengers. Here we see his sort of most iconic face with Patrick Macnee as Steed and Diana Rigg as Emma Peel. And so he created this in the 60s, but he hadn't created, he started writing for it, then he became the script editor, and he's sort of the man who sort of defined, when you think of the Avengers from the 60s, that era is the era that Brian Clements creates. And so he is very much the driving force behind this. And then he also creates, creates new Avengers in the 70s with, Purdy. Her name will come to etc. Yeah, so she plays. So that is taken in the 70s, and it's a sort of sequel series to the Avengers, and in fact, it's running roughly at the same time as the Professionals. Now, Brian Clements comes up with the idea of the Professionals, and so he pitches it to ITV, to London Weekend TV, and it gets made. And so, as I say, it runs from 77 to 83, with the last episodes being made in 81. And it really is it's very much an action-packed. It's sort of enclosed weekly stories, and they are action-packed thrillers. Usually, it's going up against, as I said before, criminals, terrorists of various kinds. In fact, one of the episodes that's being adapted into this novelised here, which is the long. Let me just double check. It's let's see. Sorry about this. Old Dog New Tricks. The opening. One of the early scenes is a shipment of the IRA having a group of IRA men having stolen arms of the British Army, and then ambushed by criminals to steal those arms off the IRA. And so you've got real world things in there. There is an episode later on, I can't remember the name. It has Michael Kitchen playing a terrorist. Clearly, this was for some reason they are never called the IRA. It is quite clearly the IRA. They're called the organisation. James Cosmo is also in that book. In that particular episode, it's really good, where sort of going after this organisation, and sort of one sort of radical faction is trying to take over, from what I can remember, over this organisation, which is clearly the provisional IRA. But I still don't understand what that was mentioned when they mentioned the IRA in one of the early episodes of series 1. But also, you have various sort of them going up against Soviet. Based on intelligence services, usually the KGB. One of the first episodes in the first series, I think it's actually the second series, called Female Factor, has a cabinet minister being blackmailed due to an affair with a young woman by the KGB, and Bowie Doyle and Cowley have to sort of deal with this and deal with the KGB and stop it. And they're also nice that though the series very much focus on the relationship between Bodie and Doyle and their actions, George Cowley is a big part of this. He's their boss. He's like in James Bond, but he has more sort of an active role in things. In the series, it's very clear that he is a man who's been in the training intelligence services in the late 1930s. So in one of the early episodes, you learn that he was a sort of teenage runaway. He went to Spain during the Spanish Civil War and fought in the International Brigade, and then got an injury there, which gives him a slight limp. And then he serves in the British Army during the Second World War, serves in, I think, Malaya and Korea in the Army, then does the intelligence services in MI5, and then from there he goes into CO5, or I think he might have gone into the SAS as well, but I'm not. It's never quite very clear. But you get this very much idea of him being a man a man of the world, great deal of action, and is very much suitable for the role he's in. And actually Brian Clements, who when he did an interview in the 90s about the Professionals, and he stated that he thought that the idea of a real CO5 was a good thing, and he mentions, and he in that interview mentions the fact that people accused it of being fascist, and he didn't think it was. And in fact, that's a point made in one of the early episodes of series 1, where Cowley's giving this speech to sort of these newly recruited officers, newly recruited CI5 agents, and he's mentioning how we're going to hit them first before they get to us. We're going to clean up the streets, and if this means that it turns one or two members of civilians into sort of anti-authority anarchists, so be it. And if that means one or two MPs start writing letters in the papers and protesting, bad luck. I will support you when dealing with the criminals. And then after this, Bodie says to him, it sounds a bit fascist, and sort of you can and Cowley gets a bit rolled up by this, but doesn't say anything. And then Doyle mentions the fact that he's serving in the International Brigade in Spain. So that's Brian Clough sort of preempts that criticism in the episode in that episode the early on in the series. They are, as I say, really enjoyable. A really interesting series in the sense that the CFI is very much like a sort of British FBI, and you get to see sort of the infight, the sort of fighting they have between the other branches of the intelligence services, the armed forces, and the police. That is really well done, and the relationship between Bodie and Doyle is nice. Bodie is very much a sort of man of action, aggressive, and is willing to do those fists do the talking. At the same time, he will only fight. He fights when somebody fights him. Whereas Doyle, on the other hand, is let's just go back to Doyle here in the front. Is a lot more sort of laid back, relaxed, thoughtful, but also a lot more sort of fiery tempered, and so he will. More importantly, he will run headfirst into sort of action and sort of start fighting away. So it's a nice contrast, and I believe that Lewis Collins and Martin Shaw didn't necessarily get on personally. They didn't hate each other, but they weren't sort of friends during the course of this, and that actually makes the on-screen their on-screen performances really enjoyable to watch, because you can see this sense of competitiveness between the two of them. Even though the characters are obviously friends, they get on. Martin Shaw was actually quite critical of the series during its production, and for years afterwards, he wouldn't let the repeats take place in Britain, because he felt these characters were one-dimensional and not very sort of developed. And it was only when he found out that Gordon Jackson's widow, who actually appears in an episode playing George Cowley's lost love, Annie, that she was actually suffering financially because she wasn't getting his Gordon Jackson residuals for anything with to do with professionals. That Martin Shaw sort of let the repeats of the professionals go ahead in Britain. And actually, that's how I saw it personally on ITV. Can't remember ITV3 or ITV4 initially, but I remember watching. I really enjoyed them. I'd seen clips of them over the years on various sort of best of shows, the sort of 100 greatest TV shows, 100 greatest action drama sort of things over the years. Then there was I think it was the 50th anniversary in 2005 of ITV, and they did a series of documentaries about sort of great shows, and The Professionals was one, as was Sweeney. Now, I should say that whilst Martin Shaw and Lewis Collins may not have necessarily got on, both of them really did like Gordon Jackson. Their description of Gordon Jackson was this lovely, gentle man who was sort of a complete contrast with George Cowley, who was this gruff, hard-headed figure, and Gordon Jackson was this gentle, really gentle man who was sort of lovely to be around. Also, I will say that whilst Lewis Collins and Martin Shaw didn't get on personally, when Lewis Collins died in 2013, Martin Shaw said, and this is absolutely right, it was a missed opportunity that Lewis Collins didn't become James Bond, because, as I say, Lewis Collins, who was this, he was a gun collector, he was a martial art, he was a I think black belt in karate or jiu-jitsu. He had a private pilot's license. He was in the Territorial SAS. Territorial Parachute Regiment. He tried to join the Territorial SAS, but because of his star, his sort of profile from professionals, he couldn't actually join. And so he was a sort of the action as a man of action who was sort of perfect to play James Bond, and he didn't get it, which was terrible, a terrible thing. Though, if you want to see what he was like, what he may have been like at James Bond, I highly recommend you watch the 1983 film Who Dares Wins, which actually, in fact, I've done a review of on my channel, so you'll find that I did last August. It's actually a review of both the film and the book which the film was made from. Interestingly, that film was made that the author, but I think Ken Follett, no, not Ken Follett, forgotten his first name now, but Follett was his surname. Don Sharp, who was the man who sort of produced and directed that film. Ewan Lloyd is the one who produced it. Ewan Lloyd it's in the Iranian Embassy siege, wanted to make a film inspired by it. Went to Follett, said you gave him the story, which had been made by George. I've got his name now. He was involved in all sorts of stuff. He's involved in Prisoner and what's the one? What's the where? Oh, I've forgotten the name of it. The series where Edward Woodward plays the at Callan. This gentleman, George something or other, had been involved in Callan. There was even suggestions that he'd been in the 1950s involved in intelligence services. And he had written, he came up with the idea, was given to Follett, and Follett wrote the book, but he wrote the book by chapters, which then sent off to Hollywood to the screenwriter, who I think his name escapes me, but he was the man who wrote the play and also the screenplay for 12 Angry Men, who turned each episode into a part of the script. And so the film was made, the script was made from the meat, which was actually being written as the book itself had been written. And so that film is very much very similar to The Professionals. So you can see why Lewis Collins was, if you watch The Professionals and you watch Who Dares Win, you can see why Collins was cast as Peter Skellen, and also and the way he portrays Peter Skellen in Who Dares Wins. You can see that it gives you a very good idea of how Lewis Collins would play James Bond. But getting back to the professional lesson, just for a second, I have somewhat gone off from the professional. So you can find, I believe, The Professionals on YouTube. There are numerous episodes there. I won't link you to them because YouTube has a tendency, when you do that, to take the episodes down. But I would recommend, if you've not seen The Professionals, to watch it. They're really good. There's a lot of action, as I say, and also there's the cars. Most prominently, the car that was used in the series was the Mark I Ford Cortina. Mark I Ford Capri, I should say. But also there were quite a lot of cars from British Leyland, and notably the Dolomite Sprint, the Dolly Sprint. There is a very funny thing about The Professionals, and this is also true of the New Avengers, that British Leyland would offer these cars as would Ford, as a sort of free publicity. However, the people at British Leyland didn't seem to understand the concept of continuity. So one day they'd turn up with a Dolomite Sprint, the next day they'd turn up with a Morris Oxford, and the sort of directors and the crew were sort of tearing their hair out at the fact that they were getting different cars on different days. And so I think that might be the reason why, if you go in some of the episodes, they don't seem to use British Leyland cars. They mostly rely on Ford cars, who Ford, unlike British Leyland, seem to understand the concept of continuity. And so bit of a behind the scenes there. So, and now throughout the episode, there's sort of the villains of the week, as it were, are actors who are now very well known. So here we have Roger Lloyd Pack, who's probably famous for playing Trigger in Only Fools and Horses, playing the assassin Ramos in one episode. In fact, it is one of the episodes novelised in this, which I believe it's. I can't quite remember at the moment. So, if you've seen the episode, you know which one is in. And then also David Suchet, now famous for playing Poirot, plays Creevus in the episode, which is also a novelisation here, which is in fact the title episode, Where the Jungle Ends. It's one of Bodhi's old mercenary buddies. And so it's a very much there's also say James Cosmos in it, and Michael Kitchen in that episode about the quote-unquote organisation with the provisional IRA. And you also have, and in this episode of Where the Jungle Ends with David Suchet, Jeffrey Palmer, who's in it, who is probably more famous for playing, I've forgotten his character's name, but in the comedy series with Judi Dench as Time Goes By. And so the very Richard Green, who in the 1950s was very well known for playing Robin Hood, appears in an episode where he is a criminal, so very rich criminal, so businessman who's highly corrupt. Then, of course, there are, I've forgotten the name of the actor now, but he plays Max de Bryn in The Pathologist, or in Inspector Morse. He appears in an episode called Not a Very Civil Servant, as a sort of corrupt local government councillor. And there are, I'm just trying to think who else appears in it. Oh yes, Nicholas Grace, very famous as an actor who's been in all sorts of things over the years. He is in an interesting episode where it's a parallel story where you have Bodhi and Doyle doing their training. I think in fact the trainer in that is Ian McCulloch, who plays playing the male lead in the Terry Nation science fiction series called Spoilers from 1975. I'll come back to that in a minute because there's an interesting connection with Brian Clements there, where so Ian McCulloch's character is training Bodhi and Doyle, bringing them through the faces, and then you have a parallel scene of Nicholas Grace and another assassin. I can't remember who he's played by, being put through some of the places, and they're both doing this because Bodhi and Doyle are protecting the target, and Nicholas Grace and his partner in crime are training to assassinate this individual. And it's interesting because you get shown that the two sets of men are actually quite similar, and they are both friendly with each other. And you can see that in another life they could have been, all four of them, been friends, but they're obviously opposite sides. And so that's a nice, interesting story. And one of my favourite professional stories is a story that, there's actually two. I've got two particular favourites. One involves Bodhi and Doyle being given the job to protect an Arab diplomat secretly entering the country, and then as they get to the different locations, there are groups of people trying to assassinate him. And the Arab diplomat's bodyguard is a rather rotund figure who gets the name. I think it's it's not Tinkerbell, which is when you see him on screen, he's very funny. But it becomes clear during the course of the episode that all is not as it seems, and the diplomat may not be the diplomat, and the reasoning behind what's going on is a bit of sort of espionage, double cross. The other one is actually a proper Cold War story, where a traitor, clearly based on Kim Philby, tries to come back to Britain, escapes the KGB in Moscow, comes back to Britain, tries to recover a list of names of agents that he left behind, and so during the course of the story, Bodhi and Doyle have to try and get him and this list before either the KGB can or other people who've been hired by the KGB to get him, including an Irish assassin. And the traitor, who's sort of Philby-like, has a daughter there, and so she comes with a threat, and so Bodhi and Doyle have to save her. Interesting thing about that particular episode is there is a film called The Jigsaw Man, which came out with Michael Caine, that came out in the early 1980s, which has a very similar story. And that was based on a book written in the late 70s. So I don't know whether the writer of that episode had read the original book and decided to use the basic idea, or it was an example of sort of writers coming up in parallel sort of parallel to each other with the same idea. But it's a really good episode. And also, one of the things that's happening during that episode is a number of the agents who have been betrayed into the 50s by this Philby-like character are themselves going after him because they want to understand the revenge. And actually, that bit about the sort of idea being that two writers have the same idea. I mentioned earlier in McCullough in that episode with this the parallel of the assassin of Bodie Doyle. He had been in that series called Survivors, which came out in 1975, which is about a pandemic striking the world, killing off huge numbers of people. And so the story follows a group of people in Britain as they sort of rebuild their lives in this sort of post-apocalyptic world. Now, that was created by, well, allegedly created by Terry Nation, who is more famous for creating Daleks in Doctor Who. However, when the Survivors went to production, Brian Clements started to sue Terry Nation because he said that he had submitted the idea for essentially the Survivors with the Screenwriters Guild of Britain, and that Terry Nation, he came up with the idea in the 60s, and then Terry Nation stole it from him, and they got into the increasingly sort of strong legal battle, which only ended because they both could see that because both of them were being nearly bankrupted by the legal fees. And it's very important because Brian Clements and Terry Nation had both been friends before this, and they were never friends afterwards. It was an unfortunate thing. And so, so that's another piece of trivia, some British TV and film from this era. So I'm going to bring things to an end now, partly because I really can't think of much more to speak about. But thank you for tuning in. I know that John is in the chat. Yes, I thought I had to show that intro, John, just because it's the way I was properly introduced to them, and I think it's the best way for people to be introduced to the professionals, for them to get an idea of what it's about. And so, when I do my reviews of each of these novelisations, I'll get rid of that. I will be putting a link to this live stream in the description so people can get an idea of what this is about if they haven't seen the live stream. But I hope for those of you who are watching the live stream who didn't know what the professionals were before, you've got an idea. And that means that when I come to do these reviews, where I will also be rewatching the episodes before I do the review, so I can actually get a proper sort of idea of what the novelisations are like. You'll have an idea you'll have a general idea of what this series are like and what the stories are like as well. So with that book two, I'll be saying goodbye, and I will see you later. Bye, book two.